This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Connected Data, the makers of the Transporter and Transporter Sync. Your data in your own private cloud, safe, secure, and cost-effective. Save 10% off any transporter model, up to $35, using the code MV10, or get $20 off the Transporter Sync with the code MV20, both at filetransporterstore.com. Welcome back to Mac Notables on MacVoices. This is a Talk of the Mac Community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we get to have another session with Mr. Ted Landau for, well, I think the last time it was wit and wisdom. This time it's intelligence and good looks.
Wow.
How's that?
Yeah, great.
You like that intro better than wit and wisdom, Ted?
I'll go with that.
Okay. Ted, a lot of things have changed in the world since you and I talked. I don't think we talked about Beats and Apple. Let's see. Twitter was going to buy SoundCloud, then they're not. AT&T bought DirecTV, or is trying to buy DirecTV. It just seems like it's acquisition season.
Well, okay, yes. As far as AT&T and DirecTV is concerned, to me, it's just another bummer. The general result of all this is, I think we're converging to the point where there's going to be two companies that are dominant in this whole field, which will be Comcast and AT&T. And everybody else, there'll be some smaller players that are left on the side for some of the markets, like T-Mobile and Sprint for phones. But basically, when it comes to the big guns of internet access, TV, and phones, a trifecta, it'll be Comcast and AT&T, and I don't think that's good news for any consumers. It's good news for AT&T and Comcast, but that's about it. So I think ultimately prices will go up, service will go down, and I'm not looking forward to it. But there you have it. So.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at this too, and I guess the thing that distresses me is it would be great if one of the companies doing the acquiring had this spectacular reputation for service and customer focus and everything, and it just seems like the guys who are doing the acquiring are the ones that seem to do the worst job of that. At least that's the perception I have.
Well, I don't know who does a good job. So it would be hard for me to imagine who I would want instead. What I would want are things to change and for there to be more openness in your options, not less. So yeah. As far as Beats is concerned, I don't have a lot to say about that except that it's another example of the rumor mill churning something up, and it may turn out to be true. I think. My feeling is there was enough credence to these reports that I don't think it was just invented. I think Apple was talking to Beats and may still be talking to Beats. For all I know, an announcement of the purchase may come tomorrow. Yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility. But in terms of the actual initial reports, the initial reports came out like on a Thursday or a Friday, and they said, and the tone of the reports was, it's a done deal, and it'll be announced next Monday or Tuesday. And of course, as we all now know, it didn't get announced next Monday or Tuesday, and today is a week since that Monday or Tuesday, and it hasn't gotten announced this Monday or Tuesday either. And there's no word as to anymore as to exactly when it's going to be announced. The whole deal may have scuttled for all we know, and it's just another example of the rumor mills jumping the gun. And what really sort of irritated me about it, I guess, is it's bad enough that the rumor mills jumped the gun, but then we were inundated with literally, hundreds of articles about what it all means. Is it good? Is it bad? What are you going to do now that it was almost like these were the articles that you would have expected to come out after the announcement, not in anticipation of what may never happen. All the articles had the tone of this is a done deal, now let's deal with it, and then of course they all look a little foolish when the deal isn't announced. And it was not something. It was not Mac journalism's or Apple journalism's highest moment. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I don't know why, and I plead guilty. We did a Mac jury on half of a Mac jury on the topic, just because it seemed to be there were so many factors in it that seemed out of Apple's wheelhouse, and of course we all keep looking at the Tim Cook Apple versus the Steve Jobs Apple, whether we should or not. It's still there. It's still fresh. And this one seemed to be something that maybe was the Tim Cook Apple. And if it ever happens, it'll definitely be a Tim Cook Apple. But it captured everybody's imagination from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. And in terms of Tim Cook's Apple, one other aside, yeah, I'm certainly not an Apple doomsayer, far from it. And if anything, Apple stock has been going in a nice direction recently, so people seem to be kind of bullish on Apple right now, which is kind of nice for people like me that both have Apple stock and in general like Apple to be successful. But I have to say, and though there's no, like I said, there's no prospect of doom or anything close to it coming up. I've been hearing Tim Cook say for well over a year now that they have all these great products coming down the pipe. And except for the new Mac Pro, which is a very, marginally marketed product, it's designed to appeal to a very small segment of the market. Except for the Mac Pro, there hasn't been anything. And now the last we were told is to expect all these slew of new products. Well, I shouldn't say there haven't been anything. There have been new iPads and new iPhones coming along the way, but nothing extraordinary in that regard. And none of the supposed new categories of products that have been rumored. There's no major update to the Apple TV. Certainly no Apple Television. No iWatch or anything equivalent to that. No major redesign of the iMac. We haven't seen an update to the Mac Mini in like 2 years. So there's in terms of these great new products, it hasn't happened, and that's supposed to happen in the latter half of 2014, and I think it certainly may. I think we're certainly going to see a major revision to the iPhone. That will be something that's coming. Beyond that, I'm not sure. And I think it's beginning to be time to deliver. You can only talk about what's the good things are coming for so long before people begin to say, yeah, you've said that already for 2 years. When is it actually going to happen?
And I try to balance that out, Ted, with just how impatient we've all become at, what's the latest, greatest new thing. And that's from the analysts right on down to you and me. My credit card's had a little bit of a rest for a while, and I kind of like that part. But, I'm always like you, looking for what are they going to do next. And I wonder, have we become a little bit spoiled at that? Has the pace of the change affected us to the point now that we have to expect something every 3, 6, 9 months?
Well, certainly not every 3, 6, 9 months. I mean, you have to expect new products. They don't have to be revolutionary new products. And that's an interesting point in itself because, I've thought about that in terms of, one view is to say Apple has set us up to expect that. Certainly, we had the iMac in '98, the iPod in 2001, I think, somewhere around then, the iPhone 2007, the iPad 2010, the MacBook Air came out somewhere along the way, certainly a major advance. So yes, we've come to expect major new developments in Apple, and some would therefore say that Apple's success depends upon periodically coming out with these major new products, and if we don't see it, it's trouble. And that. There's some merit to that argument. I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think a lack of new products means doom for Apple, but it could mean a slower rate of growth. On the other hand, there are a lot of companies that are very successful that never come out with radical new products. I mean, look at the car industry. I mean, General Motors, they've come out. The electronic vehicles, EVs, are certainly a major advance that have come along. But aside from that, they come out with a new Chevrolet model for 2014. No one says, "Oh my God, this is very similar to the ones they had in 2010." They haven't come out with a major new type of car in 15 years, and it doesn't seem to hurt the fact that that these car companies continue to chug along. And it's the same thing with a lot of industries where they get by without any major innovation. And so the question is, can Apple transition from the sort of company that people expect a major new thing every few years to one that's more stable and be just as successful? Should we expect that to be the case? Are we reaching a plateau in the market for at least for a while before we're going to see major new changes come along? Are the major new changes going to come from someplace else? And that was another interesting question. People complain that there aren't major new product categories coming out from Apple, but really, who else is doing it? I'm trying to think of what other company is picking up the ball and coming out with major new categories that people are saying, "Wow, Apple should have thought of that." There isn't much, if anything, that I would put into that category.
No, and it's interesting, and at the risk of taking us off on a big Samsung discussion, we see companies copy things that Apple does, sometimes blatantly, sometimes not quite so blatantly, but they keep trying to refine it, they keep trying to differentiate it. And I have yet to see anything that, at least in my opinion, really is a huge functional differentiator. You can argue about the size of the Samsung phones versus the iPhone, but we've been through that, and I'm not sure that size necessarily is a real differentiator. I guess it could be, but as far as the actual function of it, they tried the thing where the phone followed your eyes and shut the video off if you weren't looking at it. Mm-hmm. Well, I heard about that for a week and a half, and then it disappeared, and I haven't heard anybody say, "Wow, that's the reason I'm buying my a Samsung phone, that it can watch my eyes."
Right. No, I agree, and yeah, there are things that Samsung phones can do that Apple iPhones can't. I would certainly like a split-screen multitasking capability with the ability to cut and paste across windows in some easy fashion. At least on the iPad, that would certainly enhance the iPad's functionality as far as I'm concerned. And to some extent, some Samsung devices can do that, but it's not like a new category. It's not like what people complain that Apple isn't doing. So Apple may not be doing it at the pace you would like, but it's not as if it's being surpassed by other companies that are doing it, is my point.
Yeah. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see as we go forward. And, of course, the other thing, too, that we're also guilty of is that right this minute we're not happy because we want this and that and the other. And come WWDC, we may get some of those things. We may not, but we may, as far as some of the new capabilities. We've both talked about the question of hardware. So,
right, we talked about that last time.
Yeah, so we shall see.
We'll see. We'll talk about it again after WWDC.
I would think so.
Connected Data and their transporter products are back as a sponsor of MacVoices, and I couldn't be happier. That's because I love the idea of having more and more of my data in the cloud, but as breaches, cracks, and hacks take up regular residence in each week's headlines, I find myself less and less comfortable with those clouds. Transporter solves that by giving you your own private cloud that only you have access to, unless you want to give someone else access to it. And that automatically makes it less of a target than any of those big cloud storage services. So what do you want to do with your transporter and your private cloud? Automatically upload your photos and videos from your iPhone and iPad? You've got it. The File Transporter app, free in the iOS store, now has that capability built in. A quick trip to the app's settings and you'll never have to worry about losing another video or photo because they will be safe on your transporter. Delete them and shoot more. Do you want more cloud storage with all its benefits of syncing, sharing, and the promise of my personal holy grail, everything, everywhere, all the time, but don't want to pay the high price of the other services? Then Transporter's for you. Starting at $199 for 500 gigs of storage, and yes, I did say gigs, up to $349 for 2 terabytes of storage, and yes, I did say terabytes, Transporter is multiples cheaper than those online services. And with them, you have to renew every year. With Transporter, buy once and your cloud is yours, and no one's going to take it away from you. And to make the deal even sweeter, get 10% off those prices, up to $35, using the code MV10. Or if you already have a hard drive laying around and want the Transporter's function, pick up the Transporter Sync for only $99. But that's only if you're not paying attention, because by using the code MV20, you can save $20 on that retail price. Those deals are good only at filetransporterstore.com, and they won't be around forever, so don't put it off. Get more bang for your cloud storage buck and improve your security and privacy in the process. Find out more at filetransporter.com/MV, and don't forget those discount codes, MV10 and MV20. Connected Data, the makers of the Transporter and Transporter Sync. Your data in your own private cloud, safe, secure, and cost-effective. Welcome back to Connected Data, and thanks for your support of MacVoices.
Ted, I wanted to, though, get into the iTunes bug. Knowing you, or the recent iTunes permissions issue, or however you want to say it, I'm hesitant to call it a bug. Maybe you do. But being the troubleshooting guy, I wanted to get your take on this. Explain to people what it is and how it gets fixed, or whether they should be worried about it.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'd say is this whole incident points up the value of sometimes, anyway, maybe most times, waiting before you update. Because this was a brouhaha that lasted for about 48 hours before it was completely resolved. And if you were a sort of mini Rip Van Winkle and was asleep for those 2 days and woke up, you could have updated perfectly fine and needed to know absolutely nothing about anything that had transpired before, because it all would have been resolved and there would have been no problem for you to worry about. So, we used to often say that when a new update comes out, wait a couple of days, let everybody else, certainly let the so-called experts give it a try and see whether there's going to be a problem, and then if there isn't, then go ahead and update. Of course, Apple doesn't encourage that anymore. I think that's part of the problem. Now with all this automatic software update, things get installed. You're either prompted to install something, or it automatically gets installed immediately upon when it becomes available, just about. So Apple certainly doesn't encourage that sort of restraint, but I would still recommend waiting 48 hours before you update. I never, for instance, even now, and even with all the supposed knowledge that I have of these sort of things, I never update an OS version or an iOS version until about 72 hours after it comes out. Just to wait. Certainly not on my main machine that I depend on, because the last thing I want is to install it on my main machine and then discover, I just erased my entire hard drive. Which actually, getting to the iTunes bug specifically, that could have happened, and it did happen. Years ago. I was a little discussion on Twitter this morning between Rich Siegel and Dave Hamilton, John Martellero, and myself, where we were trying to, or at least they were trying to recall a previous iTunes bug, and Rich reminded us initially of one that went way back, and I looked it up in my archives and found it. And yes, in 2001, iTunes 2.0 was released, and the installer script for the installer included a remove command that was designed to remove the old version of iTunes, but it was written incorrectly, such that if you had a space in the name, I don't remember all the details exactly, but something like if you had a space in the name of your hard drive, like if your hard drive is called Chuck's hard drive with a space between Chuck's and hard drive, that it was possible that you could erase your entire hard drive when you tried to install iTunes. And it was pretty serious, and Apple fixed it very fast. And this does sort of remind me that okay, you were asking what happens. What happened in this particular bug? Apparently, there were two things. One was if you installed iTunes, and if you had Find My Mac enabled, your users folder and your shared users folder vanished from sight. It didn't really get deleted, it just became invisible. And for most people, that probably wouldn't matter that much. Many people probably have never, I'm sure if you took a survey, maybe not of the people who listen to this broadcast, who are all very handsome and knowledgeable, but if you took a broad cross-section of the people who use Macs, I would imagine the majority of them don't even know that there's a users folder, or if they ever noticed it, have never gone into it. So the fact that it became invisible probably didn't matter too much to them. For other people, including myself, that periodically go in there for various reasons, it's just an annoyance, and it also makes you wonder, what the heck's going on? Why would Apple do that? And in fact, backtracking now, I'm juggling all these things I want to say and trying to figure out what's the best order to say them in. But backtracking a little bit here, when the new version of iTunes that caused this problem was released the same day as OS X 9.3. And when it first came out, people naturally assumed that OS X 9.3 update was the cause, not iTunes, because eliminating the users folder is something that you would expect from an OS update, not from an iTunes update. And in fact, there was some feeling that this was some new deliberate move on the part of Apple that they weren't announcing, because they had already done something similar where they had made the library folder in the user's home directory invisible. and for the purported purpose, though Apple has never actually said that, of preventing casual entry into the folder and having people muck up things that they shouldn't muck up because they don't know what they're doing. If you knew what you were doing, you could get the invisible folder back, and then that was presumably okay. So people say, oh, okay, now Apple's eliminated something else, at least in terms of its visibility. As it turned out, and I think Dave Hamilton from the Mac Observer was responsible for first discovering this, it wasn't the OS 10.9.3 update at all, but it was iTunes, which made it even stranger because there was no reason that iTunes would do something like this. And it made you think that this couldn't possibly be a deliberate move by Apple, because there's no way that Apple would tie the disappearance of the users folder to an iTunes update. And then it turned out that something else was happening. I'm not sure how many people even noticed this until Apple confirmed it in a security update, that it was also making the permissions to those two folders world writable, which means that anybody could modify those folders and the contents of those folders, which essentially meant, as the Apple support article pointed out, that it was largely restricted to local users. But if you shared a computer with your family, say your son, your daughter, your wife, husband, whatever, friends that lived with you, I don't know, but if you shared your computer with us and you each had your own account to keep things separate, that even if you weren't an administrator, as I understand it, then I didn't try to test it out, but I think even if you weren't an administrator, you could go into this users folder now and delete things and change things. You could delete someone else's files in their account, because the account no longer restricted who could have access to it among local users. And again, in theory, that's not very serious, because presumably whoever has local access to your computer is somebody you know and trust, and you're not too worried that your spouse is going to say, "That's it, I'm deleting all your files." It isn't, maybe if you have a vindictive spouse who knows about this bug and takes advantage of it, yes, but I don't think that was a high likelihood event that was about to occur. So in some sense, the bug, while serious, I mean, these are things that are serious in principle. That the users folder seems to disappear, these folders become world writable. In point of fact, most people would probably not be bothered by them. And the reason I go out of my way to say that is that there was a lot of complaints that how could Apple let this go by? What happened to their beta testing? That this could actually have even gotten through their beta testing, and what do we have to now worry about what's going on with them? Could there be other serious things like this down the pike because their beta testing is so screwed up? I'm a little bit more forgiving of them in that regard. My feeling is, when you're beta testing iTunes, you're probably not looking to see whether the users folder disappears. It wouldn't occur to you to look at that. You're probably looking to, most of your time is being spent using iTunes and seeing whether it works properly and whether there's some feature of iTunes that got screwed up as a result of the changes that they were made, and not whether something in a place that you would have thought was totally irrelevant to iTunes might have gotten screwed up. And so I can imagine that with limited beta testing, this might have never been discovered. On the other hand, it is pretty impressive that within like 30 seconds of iTunes update getting released, people were reporting it. So clearly people were making the connection rather fast. But so I don't think I'm not as critical of Apple in that regard as some other people have been. On the other hand, and I know I'm going on for a long stretch here without giving you a chance to say anything, it does get into one other related point that I'll make, and that is about Apple's support site in general. And Apple has a pretty decent support site. If you go to their support, you can sort of drill down, navigate to what you want. Say what product do you want to learn about, what feature of this product are you interested in, and then eventually get presented with a list of articles and sometimes links to the discussions forums that cover that particular topic. And that's kind of nice, including what's called their knowledge base or KB articles. But however, what would have been nice in a case like this, and I guess let me backtrack one more second, the resolution of this problem, we didn't get to it. The resolution of all this iTunes bug problem is that within 48 hours, Apple released a new version of iTunes 11.2.1, I think, to replace 11.2. And the 11.2.1 fixed these problems. So the world writable gone, users folder visible again, problems fixed. And that's what I meant by if you waited 48 hours, you would not have even had to bother with this whole issue. You wouldn't have had to read all the dozens of articles that were written about it. But if you were wondering what was going on, you would have been hard-pressed to find any official Apple documentation about it. Certainly there was no press release to cover it. There was no alert on the home page that warned people to update to 11.2.1 if they haven't done so, because it could fix serious problems. There was no note on the iTunes page about it. And even though there were two related knowledge-based KB articles about it, one the security one about the permissions and the other one about the loss of the users folder, you'd be hard-pressed to find those articles from their support site. There was nowhere on the support site that you could have easily located those articles or even known that they existed. And the best you could have done in the past was Apple had a web page that listed all of the KB articles that had been published in the last 30 days. And I regularly checked into that. I write this column called Bugs and Fixes for Macworld magazine, still occasionally. I don't do it much anymore. And one place I would look to see what were interesting new bugs to talk about was this recently modified knowledge base articles, because if Apple typically doesn't talk about bugs until after they're fixed. Sometimes they'll acknowledge them, but in any case, if there were bugs that Apple felt was worth noticing or had announced that they'd fixed, it would be a knowledge base article about it. And that's where I would have gone to find out about the latest information that Apple was willing to impart anyway on this iTunes bug. But coincidentally, about a week before this iTunes bug surfaced, Apple mysteriously discontinued this recently modified articles page. Again, with no announcement, and it isn't even clear, I'm not even 100% clear that it's intentional, because when I go to the link that takes to what used to be that page, I don't get a 404 error that says the page doesn't exist anymore, or a redirect or anything like that. The page actually opens, but it's just totally blank, which is weird and not very professional in my view on Apple's part. And this is not the first time that they've done something like this. I had some vague memory of this being an issue, and I went back and I found a Mac Observer article that I wrote for my user-friendly view column back in, I think, 2009, where they had done pretty much the same thing, and I complained about it, and they later reversed themselves and restored the functionality. And maybe they'll do that here again, I don't know. But I just don't understand it, why they have progressively made it harder and harder to search their knowledge base articles over the years, outside of the indirect way that you can do it through their support website. It's like they don't. It's like there's a sort of yin-yang, where on the one hand they feel some, and I'm putting words in their mouth now, I don't know that it's actually this, but where they feel some ethical obligation to report these things in these knowledge-based articles, so that they can say, yes, we've made it public, we've done our duty. And on the other hand, out of perhaps some sense that they don't like to ever admit that they've done something wrong, they don't want to make too big a deal of it, because they don't want to call attention to the fact that they're fixing problems, and so they try to obscure access to these things so that most people never even find out that the problem existed, or which also means that they don't find out how to fix it, unfortunately. And I'm kind of annoyed with Apple over this. I was annoyed with it back in 2009 when I wrote about it, and I actually think I wrote about it before 2009. I remember writing about changes back when I was doing McFixit that Apple had deteriorated the knowledge-based searching capability, and they continue to do so for whatever reason. Anyway, that's a long little rant there. Whatever. I turn it back to you.
Ted, a couple things here, but first of all, on the support, the missing page on support, how long has that been missing? 2 days, 2 weeks?
No, about, I think, close to 2 weeks now.
2 weeks, okay. So it's definitely not something that just somebody missed and it slipped. It appears to be an intentional thing of some kind.
It's either intentional or they're in no hurry to fix it. Let's put it that way.
Well, now let's flip over to the other side. They did get this iTunes bug fix out pretty darn quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Very fast.
Which says that they can do it when they want to, when they need to, and when the sense of urgency is there. So I'm not suggesting that excuses the other matter, but it does give you a little bit of a decent feeling that, okay, now if the hard drive had been erased, well, that's,
but
it would have been gone.
Yes, I mean, my complaint about the fix coming, even though it was quite fast, is how obscure Apple made the significance of the fix. That if you looked at the basic release notes for iTunes, it doesn't say, there's nowhere that says that this fixes that bug. In order to find out about it, for most people, I think what you'd have to do is, number one, there'd be a link that says, for security information about this update, go to this page. And if you click that link, which most people probably would not bother doing, it tells you about the permissions error. And then it says, for more general information about the iTunes, or something like that. I may not have the wording exact. I could look it up if you wanted me to. But from the security update document, it says, for more general information about the iTunes update, click this link. And that takes you then to yet another knowledge-based document that talks about the disappearance of the users folder and notes that updating to 11.2.1 should restore the users folder. So if you were a typical iTunes user, and of course most people would just get the software update that says a new version of iTunes is available and not have any links, and just install it. But if you were a typical iTunes user, you would see here's what's new in the new version of iTunes, and it wouldn't mention anything about fixing this bug. In order to find out about the disappearing users folders, you'd have to go drill down through two links that most people would never bother to do. And I don't see any reason why Apple has to make it that difficult.
We've talked about it a million times, and I'm sorry, folks, we got to do it again. But this is just another example of why you need a good backup and why it may be prudent to run one of those backups right before you do one of these upgrades. I mean, it's unlikely, probably not, but if it had happened, if you had been completely wiped out, your hard drive had been completely wiped out. I'm sorry, there's not even anything Apple can do about that. Mistake or not, it's gone.
Yeah, well, that doesn't happen very often, thankfully, but yes.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've gotten sloppy in some of that, and I won't again for a while, because I've just been reminded. Happily, it didn't happen to me, because I didn't intentionally wait this time. I just didn't have the opportunity to do it. But it reminds me just how important that one key backup is, so that even if it just becomes inconvenient, at least I could regress and go back one. And that's not something that the software updates that Apple publishes allow you to do. Mm-hmm. You pretty much have to have a clone of the way your system was and then clone it back over.
Yeah, well, as we've said innumerable times, you should always back up and have relatively current backups. But in this particular case, almost as useful would be just waiting before you update it, like we said at the outset. So if you waited 72 hours after the update came out before you installed it, you wouldn't have to worry about any of this stuff.
Is that your personal magic number, Ted? 72 hours?
Yes, it is my personal magic. My feeling is, based on experience, that if there's anything seriously wrong with a new piece of software, 95 to 99% of the time it'll get discovered within 72 hours. Yeah, I as a rule of thumb, I'd say that's true. Yeah,
it's a pretty good rule of thumb, and it's not. I can't think of too many things out there that are going to be, unless it's a security update of some kind, that are going to expose you in any way, shape, or form, should you decide to wait 72 hours or even maybe a little longer.
Of course, it requires that you do some work. That's the other thing. It's not. Let's turn it around. Let's say something serious was discovered within the first 72 hours. How does Joe user find out about it? Well, the only way they would find out about it is if they were the sort of person that read stuff online, that read McMurrow's website, the Mac Observer, whatever, and checked and found those reports. If they were and I know, I'm sure you do too. I mean, I know lots of people that use Macs that don't even know that those websites exist, and so 72 hours could go by, and 72 hours have gone by. I'm going to install it. I waited the 72 hours that Ted said, and now I'm going to install it. But no, wait a minute. I didn't say just wait 72 hours. I said wait 72 hours and find out whether something has actually been reported in that 72 hours. It's both.
Yeah. Well, hopefully anything of that dangerous in nature would be corrected within 72 hours, so that the update that you go to download in the Mac App Store or anywhere else would have been removed and corrected. Hopefully.
Yeah, but it depends on, sometimes what will happen instead is that Apple or whatever the company is that's involved will remove the update because it can't release a fix in time. And so they'll say, you read an article that says this update temporarily removed, and that's usually a good sign that you shouldn't be installing.
There's one other thing, and I'm not sure, at least in my mind, it sort of dovetails in here. And I can't quote the entity that did it, but there was a report card that came out on the companies that help protect your private personal information. Mm-hmm. And Apple was among the ones that got the top ranking, which I was obviously glad to see. Mm-hmm. I was a little distressed to see that Amazon was not among the top. And I forget who was at the bottom. They were... You have to go and look it up, folks. I'll have to try to find a link and put it in the show notes. But it's good that Apple's taking care of us in that way. And there's some other folks out there that aren't. And I just sat through a seminar today on cybersecurity and cyber risk. And the data breach thing is frankly reaching frightening proportions if you're paying attention to it.
Yeah, and it's gone. You just get used to it. I think at some point it becomes so common that you just start accepting it as, I remember the first time I started getting junk mail and saying, what is this? I never asked for this stuff to come. And I was really, how do I stop it? How do I get rid of it? Well, I've given up on that. Yeah. There's no getting rid of it. You learn to deal with it. It just becomes part of life. And I think that's where that's going too.
Well, the thing that concerns me is that we all are going to get jaded a bit. That, okay, so I've gotten another 3 notifications this week that my data may have been exposed by department store A and online service B and auto dealers C, and that I'm not going to pay attention to it. And that, you're right. I mean, that's the world we live in. But at what point do you just throw up your hands and say, maybe I just need to have my credit card company send me a new number every 6 weeks or something? It's crazy.
Yeah, you could play the odds. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world. When someone says, for instance, that there's been a breach and 10 million email addresses, credit cards, whatever, have been stolen, chances are, and by the time it gets fixed anyway, that most of those, nothing's going to happen to most of those 10 million users. And so the odds are sort of in your favor. It's not even if there's no way that all those credit cards are ever going to be corrupted. So you can say, I'm just going to hope that I'm not one of the ones that get in trouble, and if I do, I'll deal with it then. That's not a horrible thing to do, in my opinion. Rather, as opposed to getting a new credit card every 3 months, but every time you hear about a security breach, it's a pain in the ass to get new credit cards. Especially if you have your credit card number on 16 different websites, so that you can purchase from their shopping carts, and you use it in other places, and suddenly you get a new credit card number, and then the next time you want to go and buy something, it says, well, your credit card was rejected. It doesn't work anymore. Oh, darn, I have to go and up. So, I mean, I don't want to have to go through that every 3 months just because there's a security breach somewhere. And you're tempted to just say, let's see what happens.
Yeah, and I agree. And I've done that with some, and I know you have, and still a lot of people, because you just Target, the Target breach, they offered the credit card or the credit monitoring service, I think, as part of their resolution to this. And did you how many people took advantage of it? the numbers I've seen said that certainly not the majority decided that. First of all, they were, I think, concerned with Target, but just in general, there just is an apathy toward this kind of thing, and I just hope it doesn't come back and bite any of us.
No, might someday. And I'm by the way, I'm not surprised that Amazon didn't rank very high. I mean, I don't know about what they were rating exactly in terms of privacy, but Amazon is one of those places where they if you don't specifically not give them permission, they will track the pages you've been viewing, and they not only I think we talked about this once before. They not only show up on other Amazon pages when you're searching. So we noticed that you've recently looked at this, so you might be interested in that. But they show up on other sites where Amazon has some sort of presence, and so you can be on, the New York Times or something. I don't think that's actually an example, but as a potentially made-up example, you could be at the New York Times website and suddenly see something that says it's an advertisement for food processors where you never saw one before. And you say, that's odd. I was just looking at food processors on Amazon the other day. Here it is, an advertisement on the New York Times for food processors. What a coincidence. Well, it's not really a coincidence. It's because they know that you were looking for food processors on Amazon. Of course, it could be embarrassing if you were looking for pornography or something, and your wife was sitting there and said, "Oh, it's your previous interest in naked women. Yeah. we suggest this magazine." Yeah. But that's the way it works now.
Well, the thing that I find humorous about it is after let's say I buy a microphone and I've bought it, but the microphones still chase me around the internet for a few days until I go and look at something else. So they're not perfect yet. They're working on it, but they're not quite perfect to say, okay, we could serve him something better than more microphones.
Right. But yeah, it's very annoying. A lot of people complain about it, but again, they make it hard. The default option is to allow all that stuff, and you have to figure. Of course, Facebook is the worst for that. You have to figure out how to navigate the labyrinth to turn all these things off if you don't like them.
Yeah, part of me says we need separate accounts. We need the open and obvious account, and then you need something secure. But even if you have something secure, you got to dig down and figure out how to make it secure or make it non-shareable. So it's an interesting time and an interesting world we live in.
Yep.
So this is your last chance. Any last-minute thoughts, predictions, desires, wants for WWDC?
Nothing that we didn't cover last time. No, I haven't moved beyond that. My biggest hope is that there'll be a major update to the Apple TV, and personal hope. Well, let me put it this way. My biggest hope tempered by what I think is realistic. My biggest hope would be that something totally out of the realm of possibility, so let's not go there. But if I temper my hopes with what might be realistically possible, my biggest hope is that there's a major upgrade to the Apple TV. Something that includes an Apple TV App Store or Channel Store or something like that, where it becomes a little bit more open. After that, it'll all be gravy, whatever they have. I'm also, though I don't necessarily see this tied to WWDC, I'd also like to see some significant upgrade to the Mac Mini. I've been struggling with what to do. I have a 2009 Mac Pro. And it's the cheese grater model, and it's still serving me. I'm using it right now. This is how we're talking to each other, through my Mac Pro, and it sits underneath my desk on the floor. And it's still surprising. The only major change I've made to it is that I've I've added an SSD drive instead of the original hard drive, and that speeds it up a lot, and it's really nice. And I've increased the RAM, okay. But basically, it's the same model that I had back in 2009, and it's surprisingly functional, even though it's like 5 years old. It just shows you how things have slowed down. A decade ago, if I said I was using a 5-year-old computer, it would have been ridiculous. But I'm ready to get something new. It doesn't have Thunderbolt ports, for instance, and I'm ready to try Thunderbolt out on my main Mac, and a couple of other things like that I'd like to see. And I'd like to get something a little faster. I'm not, for reasons that we talked about ad infinitum a few months ago, there's no way I'm getting a Mac Pro. It's just overkill. In fact, not only is it overkill in terms of the amount of money it would cost me, but it's underkill in some ways in that for the type, as Macworld Magazine pointed out, for some of the more common functions that mere mortals do as opposed to video processing type stuff, the Mac Pro is actually slower than an iMac. So you don't even get the speed that you're going to hopefully get. So I'm looking, what can I get that can replace my Mac Pro if it isn't a new Mac Pro? And I'm not totally happy with an iMac because I prefer to have my computer and my monitors separate. I'd like to be able to choose whatever monitor I want and keep it separate from the Mac. And of course, the iMac itself hasn't had a really major upgrade for a while either. It had a speed bump a while ago, but that's about it. So I'd like to see a Mac Mini come out that says, here, for all of you people like Ted Landau that had a Mac Pro and want a replacement for it, but the new Mac Pro isn't it. It's the Mac Mini is what you're looking for. And I'd like to see that model come out. The Mac Mini, Apple has always treated the Mac Mini as a sort of bad stepchild, a sort of Cinderella of the family, because the current Mac Mini doesn't have specs that are even as good as the iMac. I mean, the iMac is significantly better than the Mac Mini, just in terms of the CPU and graphics processing and things like that. So I'd like them to come out with a pretty sterling Mac Mini. That would be nice. But I don't believe they're going to do it at WWDC anyway. But that would be nice too.
The Ted Landau edition? The
Ted Landau edition, yes. So my signature will be inside the case.
You heard it here first, folks.
That's right.
No question. That would truly be an inside story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I couldn't help that. Ted, thank you for the time. It's always interesting. It's always fascinating. I'm looking forward to getting to have dinner again with you in San Francisco in a nice short period of time here.
Yeah.
This will be great.
I'll have to pick a different restaurant, and as we try to navigate our way around San Francisco's restaurant scenes, and I think it's my treat this time, by the way. So,
well, I don't know. We'll flip a coin or something.
Okay.
But
we'll let Chris Breen pay.
Yeah. Hello, Chris. Either that or maybe we will be going to an undisclosed location, but if you want to pick up the bill, folks, call us. Maybe you can join us.
That's right. We're having a little contest, and the winner gets to treat us to dinner.
I like it. How nice of us. Ted, it's great to see you. Thanks, and I'll see you in San Francisco.
Okay, great. We'll look forward to it.
Definitely. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Notables on Mac Voices. We will be back again soon with more. Thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com.